PJNET.TV. We are about to go on the air. Today's Tuesday, 24th March, 9 p.m. on the East Coast. Let's go down the checklist. We have Bradley standing by in the green room. We have a bumper rolling. We have a background ready. All cameras aimed in focus. We are streaming live on all available platforms. We are recording. Let's switch to Studio 6 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Tuesday night edition of PJNET.TV. Boy, am I excited and glad that you are here. You're going to love it. Folks, let's get down to business. It's 9 o'clock for the first time ever on PJNET.TV. I'm proud to introduce somebody that I met, albeit briefly, but I saw often at the North Carolina Christian Writers Conference just a few weeks back. His name is Brad Lee. Brad is a chaplain in our United States Army. We are proud of his service to our country, but he is also a Christian author. He has a story to tell. Let's bring Brad on board. Welcome to the Eagle's Nest PJNet Studios. Brad, good to have you with us.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Coach.
All righty. We were talking this afternoon in preparation. By the way, folks, he's a pretty persistent guy. We did not have the easiest of times getting everything wired in, so to speak. But I knew from a distance that obviously you have a book that you're seeking to publish. I guess you have it written in its entirety, the manuscript, or are you still working on it?
About 80% done.
80% done. All right, good. So what drew you, by the way, to the North Carolina Christian Writers Conference? How did that come to be?
That would have to be my wife. In fact, I've been at this for a little while, and frankly kind of floundered around not knowing what to do and how to go about getting a book published. And my wife walks in one day and says, "Hey, what about this conference?" And it's just up the road from where we live, about an hour. And to be really honest, at first I was like, why do I need to go do that? But I think I swallowed a humble pill, and I looked at it and I thought, well, why not? What do I have to lose? And that was 2 weeks ago, as you said, a little over now. And
I think 2 or 3.
I am.
Yeah. Well, Brad, in a way that doesn't surprise me, because I've heard it said, and behind every strong man is a
better woman.
No, a surprised mother-in-law, Brad. It was
fair enough. Fair enough.
But so you had never been. What were your expectations going in, and how did that kind of unfold as you were there?
I went in with a completely open mind and a teachable spirit. I wanted to soak it in as much as I could, and wanted to learn all I could. And I took advantage of every opportunity to meet with an agent or a publisher, which is where I met Dell Didway, who's now my agent. Thanks be to God, and I really appreciated his support and encouragement, which he is in part responsible for you and I meeting, really, and me being here. So very excited about what the journey has to offer. And actually my proposal right now is with a publisher, so I'm very anxiously awaiting to hear back, and appreciate your prayers for that too.
Okay, so you've got an 80% written. Maybe you'll get an 80% proposal.
That'd be great. I'll take it.
Brad, you have a story, and a story that is not often heard, not often told. And I hope that everybody out there is approaching this with the same open mind that you approach that conference. You have a special needs child that was the circumstances surrounding the birth of this child are you cannot make this stuff up, folks.
No,
I'd love. How about share that story?
So to date we have 6 children. And in 2013, our 5th child was born, and I'll save it for the book. But he was born in the car. Caden Matthew is his name. In fact, I would love to have had him here with us for a couple of minutes to say hello, but it's past bedtime, so hopefully he's asleep by now. But the short story, in a nutshell, so to speak, he was born in the car on the way to the hospital. My wife's water broke as she was getting into the car, And I knew then that we were probably going to have the baby on the way to the hospital. And I think from the time her water broke to the baby being born was approximately 12 minutes. Um, and so, sure enough, on the Glen Highway in Alaska on a cold January night of 2013, it was about 15 below zero, and Kate and Matthew decided it was time to come into the world. So, but we did not know that he had Down syndrome, and didn't really expect that. At least I didn't. In retrospect, and part of what I share in the book too is that my wife really had an inkling that something wasn't right with the pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't feel right about it physically. There were just a couple indicators to her, and I tried to be optimistic and positive. But sure enough, he was born with Down syndrome, and that really began a journey that we've been on ever since, into that world, what I call the special needs world, and frankly, part of what you and I talked about briefly today, and that is what I've termed the special needs marriage, and what it means to have a special needs marriage. A few people have heard that term even as I've used it, and think of two special needs people being married. And while that's true in some cases, I tend to think of it as any marriage that has a special needs child is what I would call a special needs marriage, because there are just different nuances in the marital relationship that are impacted, that are different from your typical marriage, or a marriage even without children. I mean, kids change everything, as we all know.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come both experientially and even in my academic pursuit to learn that having a special needs child impacts the marriage in many different ways.
Name a few. Be,
So,
of course, I don't
well,
know how much. I don't.
yeah,
Don't give me
well,
too much information, but
yeah, I tactically paused there, but here's an example of one of the first impacts, and I think that we experienced, which frankly was very gut wrenching, and that is, how long is this going to last? For example, I remember, when Caden was born, he was born at night, and he just presented differently than typical children. He had very flat affect. He laid on the warming table, and he had very low muscle tone. I wouldn't say he was underweight, but he was small. And so we just kind of knew. And I'll never forget. And I write about this. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, the next morning, and I will never forget. And I say this, and I can even now. My wife said, "Brad, we need to talk," and that woke me up out of a dead sleep. I was in the chair next to the bed. She was holding Caden, and that I had that just pit in my stomach, like, we've got to have the talk about what's going on. Nobody had said anything to us. No doctor had said, "Hey, your son has Down syndrome." Um, but my wife knew. She inherently knew, and she had done some of her research, knew some of the signs and indicators, even in newborns, what Down syndrome looked like. And so we began to talk about that, and of course, my mind's just racing, like, well, how long does this last? How long is this going to take? Wait a minute, maybe he'll get over this. Just silly things that I thought about in the moment, that I entertained, that maybe God could somehow come in and heal him from Down syndrome.
mm,
And I'll come back and say more about that later, or that's in the book too, I guess. But the reality was, what I didn't realize in that moment, but yet there was something that told me that the future trajectory, and this is where I say the special needs marriage is impacted by the longevity of the special needs child. So, for example, Caden with Down syndrome, and by the way, was recently diagnosed with autism as well. I could do a whole segment with you on where Down syndrome and autism intersect, maybe another time. But um, just looking at the long-term picture in how his life, in some ways, dictates the trajectory of our lives. So, for example, what does retirement look like for a family with a special needs child? Will he be independent? How independent will he be? Will he live with us? Will we have to care for him? One of the other gut wrenching things that I struggled with for some time was, will I get to bury my own son? with his special need. And thankfully, advances in technology and medical care and just interventions for Down syndrome, people with Down syndrome are living a lot longer than they were previously. But I still wrestled with, am I going to bury my son? Which is something every parent just shudders at the thought of. So that was one of the dynamics of what does the long-term future look like. And I think one of the other key components that I'm working on in my academic work is how a special needs child and the attention that child demands, whether it be a medical issue, for example, cerebral palsy, or some of the other more physically debilitating special needs, or whether it's autism and the meltdown in the parking lot or the checkout line, or in our case, Down syndrome. Those dynamics impact the relationship in ways that affect how you relate to each other as husband and wife. So and again, I could say a lot more about that, but I'll pause there. But simply to say that it certainly impacts the relationship. There's some positives to it as well. The love that we have enjoyed and had with Caden and Caden for us is a positive, but he is, very frankly, I say it this way, he is as challenging as he is lovable. And those are dynamics that can impact the marital relationship in many cases.
Brad, obviously, as you've indicated, this creates a strain in many ways, and when you have that kind of strain, it takes special strength. Now, I just get the impression you're a pretty strong guy, mentally. And maybe physically. We'll have to find out and do some push-ups one day together. And but there's times, I guess, that you have had to draw on strength. Where do you get that strength?
I have a new friend, Terry Wardle, if you've maybe heard of him. He says this: I'm a man that is over-informed but under-transformed. And I think over time, the wearing down of the daily grind of having a special needs child, and I won't get into Caden's behaviors right now, but it takes a toll. And from a perspective of faith, to say that my faith has sustained me, to be really honest, I talk about the first chapter in my book I titled "The Day the House Moved," and I'll share this if I have time. What I really give voice to is, because people would ask me initially, well, has this shaken your faith? To be really honest, looking back, I look back now and I had no idea how to really answer that, because it was so early and it was so new and so fresh. But this is the analogy that I came up with, and I think answers your question somewhat. I use the analogy of a house being moved, of having a special needs child, at least for us. Some people walk into that world willingly and adopt children, and God bless them. There's a special place in heaven for people that adopt children with special needs and with Down syndrome and some of the other special needs that just require so much time and attention and love. And again, we didn't know. But this is the analogy that I came up with. I said, imagine waking up one morning and you look around you and your house looks the same. The walls are the same, the carpet's the same color, the room layout is the same. But then you go to the front door and you open the door and you realize that your house has moved. It's the same house, but it's not even in a neighborhood anymore. You may not, maybe you don't live in town, but with the example I use, you look across what used to be a street and there's just this, trees and shrub brush. And, having been in Alaska when we had Caden, I pictured someplace out in the wilderness. And you run to the back door and you look out the back door and you just see more pine trees and it's just thick and all grown up. But then I imagine walking out into the backyard and I can kind of hear this sound of rushing water, like there's a stream maybe down over a hill, but I can't see it, but I can hear it and I know it's there. And just through the trees, you can maybe just kind of faintly see like a mountain range somewhere. The analogy that I kind of come to toward the end of the book is, it's taken a lot of time, but I've cleared a few trees and I've cleaned some of the brush, and I've actually walked down far enough to be able to see the stream, and there's a lot of fish in it. It's really beautiful. And the mountain range that's in the far off is really pretty. Um, that image has kind of sustained me because, to be very frank, there have been times when I felt like I was just wandering out there on my own, even spiritually, and I frankly didn't feel strong. To your point, Coach, regardless of how I look, or even people how they perceive me, I don't think I was as strong as I thought I was. But what I found is this, in the past 7 years, is that God never moved. Um, and in the same way that God, somebody said this recently as we approach Easter, God doesn't feel the same way about our sin that we do. And in the same way that God's love is consistent for us, his patience for me to kind of wander through this wilderness and figure out where the house is, to use that analogy, um, he's still there. I've moved to a place where I've kind of accepted that this is where we live now, and this is where the house is going to be. And you know what? There's some great things about where we live now. It's not what it used to be, but it's a better place, in an odd way. It's not what we asked for. One of the sections in the book I talk about is called "The Gift We Didn't Ask For," and Caden is more than a gift, and we certainly didn't ask for that. Um, but that is, to circle back to your question, what has sustained me and what has made me stronger. Frankly, that struggle. I feel kind of like Jacob, when in Genesis, I think it's Genesis, put me on the spot now, uh, when he wrestles with God, with the angel of God, and he walks away with the limp. In many ways, I feel like I've walked away with a limp, but I'm stronger for having done that. And that's made me a better person. It's made me a better father, and it's made me see the world differently, and sometimes more patiently, and sometimes not, if I'm being really honest. But it's also made me more real. And maybe that's the best place to put a pause on that.
We have about 3 minutes left. I have been remiss. Happy birthday, Chaplain.
Thank you.
It's all over the chat room.
Today's a big one.
50 laps around the sun. Are you tired yet?
50 years old. Yeah, I know. I know. As an aside, I've been telling people this. In my mind, I look younger than I really am. I don't know if you've ever experienced that,
Oh,
but
I have people tell me that all the time. I don't have to think about it.
yeah, yeah, right. So I tell people now. I said, I think in my mind that I'm younger than I look, but every day I look in the mirror, I realize that I'm not, and I have this moment of reckoning, and I have to go apologize to my wife. So that's just kind of how life works for me now.
We got about a minute left. What are have you been a writer? I mean, what caused you to put this down in the form of a book?
I think really my passion to encourage and support families, that are in the struggle, who have had their house move, and they don't really know where they're at, and maybe some of them don't have a foundation of faith and don't know that God has not abandoned them and left them. He's still there. The second part is education and awareness and advocacy, within the special needs community, and for those that operate in that realm, and for those that have opportunity. For example, I think a totally untapped resource is the church. There are so many churches that have an opportunity in front of them to minister to families that are hurting, that don't quite know how to navigate those waters that they now find themselves in. So those are some of my motivations, and I appreciate the time and hope I have another opportunity to talk about that sometime.
Based on what I am seeing in the chat room, we will have to make that opportunity, Chaplain. And you've
That'd be awesome.
wow, I'm gonna need about 10 minutes to get over this, folks. I don't know about you, but we do have Dale Didway coming up at the bottom of the hour, who is Brad's agent with Serious Writer, and the Kyle CYLE agency.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so Brad, thank you for sharing your story. There's a lot more, I'm sure, but maybe we'll get a chance to do this again. But thank you for sharing, and
So
Happy birthday, Chaplain.
thank you, Coach, and thanks everybody for watching tonight. God bless.
Folks, this is PJNET.TV. I'm your host, Coach Prasick. What a compel! I was watching the chat room and it's so riveting. I want to say a special welcome to those of you in the PJNET.TV chat room. You are the heartbeat of PJNET.TV. Those of you watching on social media, be it Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, we extend to you a special welcome. Folks, it's not over. At the bottom of the hour, we have Del Didway, who appears at the bottom of the hour every Tuesday. In the meantime, I've got to dismantle all this stuff and build it back, so I'll leave you with two questions. The first question is, what is the boldest thing you've ever done for Jesus Christ? My second question is, when was that? The challenge for myself and all of us is to never be satisfied with either answer.